Hi, everyone, once again. I'm with Anna Day, Judith, and hi, Fred. Um, and tonight be the last vision here in the future of the year and appropriate to the times, healing the great divide. And this is the last webinar, but next Thursday night, we're going to have a discussion, just like we did before the election. And so that'll be meeting format where everybody will be on screen and we can just talk about this because this is a really big issue now. And we really want to look at it. And Anna Day and I will both give you some very interesting perspectives and something really juicy to think about. And Anna Day, anything?
Well, I just, we have, we just have this divide of, I'm going to talk about the many divides we have, not just political divide, but the many divides, and a way to look at that divided issue in general and what happens in the psyche when it gets divided, what happens in the body politic when it gets divided, and what are some of the tools we can have to begin to heal that divide and what I think it's all about. And I think I'm going to go first with my presentation, and then Michael will take us into more detail. I'm going to kind of frame some of the issues, and I guess I should just get started, huh?
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, just adding on to what you said, that really it's divide on so many levels. I mean, in the write-up we talked about divide, racial divide, wealth divide, political divide, but also a spiritual and philosophical and consciousness divide. And I think you will probably go into that a little more than I do, Anadea, but I will also. But anyway, just thought I'd add that. So yeah, Anadea, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to take it away then. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a moment here to just get this going. There we go. You can all see that, I hope. Healing our divide, stretching across the chasm. And it's interesting, as I come into this as a healer, I'm a therapist, among other things. I have been healing many of the wounds of the soul. And I think of a wound as something that's been separated that should be joined. Like if you get a splash in your arm, then the flesh is, you cut through the blood vessels and you cut across nerve tissue or something. Those things should be joined. So what we have is a chasm. And, many people psychologically tend to put addiction in that chasm, trying to fill it up. But we have a purpose to these divides and to take us to a higher level. So let's look at what some of them are. I go back to Patrick Henry's statement, united we stand, divided we fall. Let us not split into factions, which must defend that union upon which our existence hangs. And of course, we have to follow that with a famous Lincoln quote, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so if we come to staying in this division and not working with it, then it, united we stand, divided we fall. And we can't let that happen. So of course we know now that the election's over, it was very clear we have a big political divide that has the potential to tear our country apart. And that political divide is not just Republicans and Democrats, but it's right and left. It's traditional and progressive, it's conservative and liberal. There's many, many different names we could go through of different sides of the fence and how we label each other. And in identity politics, one of the problems is, when a ticket has all its set of beliefs, that someone who might identify as conservative or traditional might actually read the science on climate change and believe that climate change is real. But those people, so to speak, those people in quotes for sure, the way we look at it, they don't typically support climate change. Or someone that's progressive and liberal might have a view that's more conservative, but it doesn't go with their identity politics, so they reject it. And so it doesn't allow for a lot of nuance. I think we all know a lot of this, though. Behind the political divide is also a great big economic divide, which is getting wider and wider in this country as the gap between rich and poor continues to grow. And I like this graphic because here's the guy on the poor side fishing and putting his fish in the basket. And the guy on the rich side is not fishing, he's taking the fish from the poor guy's basket. So the rich actually make money off the labors of the poor. and the poor are the one that are pulling the fish out of the sea, so to speak. So there's a huge economic divide, and the harder the poor work, the richer the rich get. Then, of course, we have a racial divide from, people of color that tend to be more marginalized, and people, the white race that tends to have an automatic privilege and live up in privilege. And you can sure see that just in the look on these men's faces of, I got this, and oh my God, what are you going to do to me? Am I safe? We have a gender divide between masculine and feminine. And you might say the men are walking a kind of tightrope, but the women are just hanging on by their bare fingernails, trying to climb up on the rope. And the gender divide, it's very hard for either side to actually see what it's like for the other and to understand how to bridge that. We have a huge divide between civilization and nature, where we are getting more and more condensed in our cities and more removed from the natural world. But one of the divides that's really showing up, I think, all over the world, but especially in the US, is also the urban and rural divide, which is part of the civilization and nature divide. And the urban people are exposed to a lot more diversity and a lot more ideas, and the rural people tend to be more traditional. Things move slower, change more slowly. They want to keep things as they are. And that's a big divide socially and culturally. And we have a divide between science and religion. And, this is one that started back in, the Renaissance, and when we had the Enlightenment period and science started to come online, the scientists said, well, we won't have anything to do with spirituality. And in order to be labeled real science, and then religion said, well, we won't have anything to do with science in order to be religion. And we had a big split, but we need to bring some of these ideas back together. And of course, with science, there's technology as well. What we're seeing is a big information divide. And I think this is one of the most serious problems we have right now, is that people are getting very, very different sets of information, different data sets, different sets of facts. And they're basing their viewpoints, their votes, their behavior, their beliefs on the facts that they're getting. And if you were getting this alternative set of facts, you might believe as they do. But that's widening and widening as the internet knows how to feed exactly what you want to hear and keeps you in the same thinking set rather than exposing you to different ideas. Then I believe we have a spiritual divide where our spirituality, whatever it is, whether it's being in nature or sitting in meditation or fasting or whatever, is very removed from our everyday life. Whether it's going to church on Sunday, it's removed from our daily life. And, we don't approach our daily life with a spiritual attitude for many people. In the self, we have a divide between mind and body, where mind has been separated from body, and most people are trying to bring them back together. It's been an area of specialty in my therapy and teaching work, is to bring people back in touch and heal the mind-body split. And then if we go back in time, we see that, there was a basic division about 700 BC with Zoroastrianism that divided the world into good and evil. And we have equated often the evil with the dark. Oh, we're going through dark times. We need to move toward the light. And so that kind of puts white in the good column and black in the evil column, and heaven in the good column, and earth, which is dark and fecund, that's in the evil column. And masculine is in the light column, and woman is connected with earth. And, we have all this lumping into good and bad, when the blinding flash of light that comes from a nuclear explosion, I think, is a lot more evil than a night of darkness. And heaven is not necessarily better than earth. We need to come back down to earth. And so we see the folly in all of this, and yet it's deeply embedded in our vocabulary. It's hard to get away from that. So why do we have so much division at this time? Why are we so polarized, and how do we bridge that gap? Well, one thing that happens in nature is the cell, which begins as a single cell and, doubles its chromosomes and then splits apart, is its way of making more of itself. You know, it's a natural process of something dividing within itself into two that can then go off in different directions and mature and maybe evolve in different ways and create something new. A myth that I am always been really fond of, especially as we have gone through these times of struggle, is from the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. It's an Indian, native India myth about Vishnu, who is the preserver god, and he comes back to earth in different incarnations. In this incarnation, he's a turtle. But what you see here in this picture is the gods and the devas, the gods, and the asuras, the demons. And here, once again, they are depicted as dark and light. I didn't, there wasn't a picture that didn't have that, I'm sorry to say. They get up on either side of this thing in the middle is Mount Meru, or the mountain, some call it Mountain Mandara. It is the mountain of existence. And they take a serpent who's called Vasuki and wrap it around the mountain here. And all the asuras get on one side and all the devas get on the other. And it really doesn't matter what you call good and evil. And they pull in opposite directions. And the devas start to pull on one end of the serpent and the asuras start to pull on the other. And because it's wrapped around this mountain, what it does is it churns the mountain back and forth. What's down here is all called the ocean of milk. And from the ocean of milk, the new possibilities arise. So they say every so often in history, this lineup of the gods and the demons will pull on the serpent and churn the ocean of milk, sort of like a washing machine agitator. And out of that churning will come new solutions, new ideas. And so this is some of the purpose of that polarization. And when we look at that, we can go and look at some of the work of George Hegel, who had what he calls a Hegelian dialectic, where you start with a thesis, a basic idea. And as you introduce that idea, it automatically creates its antithesis. It automatically creates its opposite. Jung called this enantiodromia, where something tends to give rise to its opposite. And the more one-sided we are, the more the other side is created. But out of this thesis and antithesis is created a new synthesis. And that's great. That's a higher order that embraces both parts of the divide. But then the new synthesis becomes a thesis after a while. And then it creates another antithesis and goes into another synthesis. And this goes on forever. And this is sometimes used politically, where a ruling elite creates a problem and expecting the population to react to it and call for a change. And then the desired agenda of the ruling elite is presented as a solution. We've created this problem, and now that you don't like it, we're going to create this, which is the solution. And this inevitably calls another problem. And this is the same Hegel dialectic, and calls for a change again. And this process is repeated over and over until the rulers move it toward the end point in mind. So you could say, often Republicans don't let a vote happen in the House of Congress or in the Senate or something, like they block something being voted on or even coming up and being discussed. And then they say, well, government doesn't work. And that's a problem. It's a problem that Congress can't get anything done. It's a problem of the do-nothing Democrats. Government doesn't work. Vote for us and we'll make it work. And so they're proposing a solution. But the solution inevitably becomes another problem and calls for more change. And this can be used by those in power to try and move things toward the agenda they want. So it's problem, reaction, solution, problem, reaction, solution, over and over again. And we see this happening. So another way of looking at this comes from Jung and what's called his transcendent function. So central to the notion of archetypal psychology, which is Jungian psychology, Jung talked a lot about the tension of opposites. And that when this tension is held and it's not acted upon, we're not trying to choose one side or the other. We're not making this better than that. We're not going here or there. We're just sitting in it. Then the transcendent function may spontaneously arise. And that is a third pole that embraces both sides of a dilemma. And so Jung even said that maturity is the ability to hold the tension of opposites. And I use this a lot with my clients when they were really struggling between this and that. And am I okay or am I not okay? And should I do this or should I do that? And is my boyfriend good or is he bad or whatever those, to hold the tension of opposites long enough to have something arise in the middle. And Jung said that transcendent function is not something that we actually do. It comes from experiencing that conflict, from experiencing both sides of it, from fully embracing both sides. And that when you do, there's a natural process that arises in the psyche, often in dreams and visions, that gives you that higher function, that third point of view, that transcendent place that embraces what's underneath. And so I go then to Martin Buber, who talked about a process of dialogue. And he talked about the difference between dialoguing with an I and a thou, which is you have an interior, I have an interior, and that is a connection, a we space, as it's sometimes called, or an I and an it. If I'm talking to you as a I would consider myself a progressive and I'm talking to you as a conservative. If I have in my mind that you're an it and you believe this, this, and this, then there's no real dialogue possible. There has to be an understanding of you as an interior person, you having an understanding as me as an interior person, and then have a genuine dialogue that leads us back into a unity. So there are people who are doing this. You can go to livingroomconversations.org. This was an organization founded by Joan Blades, who was one of the founders of MoveOn.org. And she believed that healing divides has to start with conversation. And that living room conversations, what she calls is just things we can have in our own living room or online these days, since we're not getting together in person. They're a simple way to connect across the divides, whether it's politics or age or gender or race or nationality or any of these divides that we've talked about. And they provide a model to facilitate connection between people, and especially between people of opposite points of view. And they will pair you up according to what you believe to find someone through the internet that you can have a conversation with that's willing to dialogue, that has an opposite point of view. And they have over 100 topics of interest. Obviously, I didn't list them all, but you can talk about climate change, or you can talk about the pandemic, or, gun control or nuclear weapons or immigration or the election or anything that is up right now. And they'll find someone for you to dialogue with. And they have certain, conversation agreements that people enter into. One is just be curious and listen to understand, not to go in there with, I'm going to change your point of view by presenting the facts and arguing my way, but to really be curious. What is it that you think about this? What is it that I can come to understand about you as a person from where you are? And how to show respect and suspend any kind of judgment about what someone thinks, even if you feel it, to hold that back and see where you can hold respect for them. To note and find common ground, and also to note differences. Okay, I see that you feel differently about that than I do. And I also see that we both value human life. Let's say, take the topic of abortion, that you believe life starts at conception and I believe life starts at birth. So we have a difference here, but we both think that human life is important, and that's a common ground. To find that, to be authentic and to welcome that from others. To be purposeful and to the point, and not, take our turn to belabor and go on, and to own and guide the conversation. And, by that, they mean to keep it on topic and to keep it, focused on, finding a transcendent place, finding the common ground, finding the respect. So when it veers from that, and if someone starts yelling at each other, to own and guide it back to the agreements. And so, a good way to do this is to start with questions. And I actually found this meme on the internet, or somebody sent it to me on Facebook, shocking things that liberals believe. But, rather than, starting with that, I didn't have time to rewrite every one of these. What if you framed any of these things as questions? Like, should someone that has served our country in the armed services, should they be homeless? Should CEOs receive 3,000 times the pay of their workers? Is that right? Is that the way we should have it? Is it right that people who embezzle money, don't go to, that they get away with it and they don't pay taxes and they can steal, but there's no punishment for it? Should politicians, especially men, be able to dictate medical decisions for women? And you don't have to say that's about abortion. You go to a higher level of something. So any of these things can be formed as a question. Should everyone have access to higher education? Is healthcare a right or a luxury? Or, should it be earned or should it be given? What should we be able to trash the earth for profit? These are good conversation starters, and they don't have to be about a particular bill or a particular decision. They can be philosophical and ways to find the common ground and the higher issue that both sides of the divide have a stake in. I believe we all want to have a good and healthy life, a life of relative prosperity and freedom and rights and safety. We all want to be respected. We all want to have equal opportunity. I think most people would agree on these things. They just have differences of how to go about it. And to realize that creative conflict can lead to lots of innovation. It doesn't have to be just fights, but new things can come out of it. So we can change the world one creative conflict at a time. And by entering into that with respect and not afraid of the conflict, we can begin to bring in the pieces that heal the world of the things that divide us and bridge the gap. So that is my kind of framing of the discussion. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael. And yes, Joanne, there will be a recording sent out. So sorry, your internet's not working today.
Yeah.
But there will be a recording sent out. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michael. Any comments, or you can launch into your own presentation.
Yeah. No, that was great. I wrote down one phrase when you showed that picture of the rich and poor fishing and the rich taking the basket of fish, and we call it in economics just our present day. What's going on? Just the nature of our economy is an extractive economy, and we can call that the trickle up economics. You heard about like Reaganomics being trickle down,
Sure.
trickle up. As you said, that many of us giving our funding the wealthy.
Absolutely. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So as a segue, then I will be talking some politics and economics and some other things, and also a very short history lesson in my presentation. And so without further ado, and then once I'm done, we'll open it up to questions, and you can use chat box or Q&A box to give your questions. So let me find my slideshow. And here we are. So healing the Great Divide. So start with facts. We want facts. And the facts are, this was New York Times, the headline, Saturday, November 7th, Biden beat Trump, according to 99% of facts. All are 100% of facts, I should say. And then I just checked a couple hours ago, election results. The electoral votes are final, 306 for Biden, 232 for Trump, but the votes are still trickling in. Biden has now almost 81 million votes, a phenomenal number, Trump 74 million. So Biden is now up by 7 million votes, which is actually the highest separation, 51.3% for Biden since I think Franklin Roosevelt. Of course, some people are not accepting that the election's over. This tweet sent by Donald Trump on Saturday, no way we lost this election. So talk about the divide when we got stuff like this going on. And then on Sunday, Trump did his first interview, a call into Fox News. And in the interview, he accused the FBI and Department of Justice of helping rig the vote, saying, let's see, he accused the FBI and Justice Department of potentially being involved in rigging the election. And he said, in typical Trumpian way, I don't know, maybe they're involved, but how people are allowed to get away from this with this stuff is unbelievable. He claims that even Democrats think he won, and he has said there's no way Biden earned more votes than Barack Obama. You know, just the typical stuff, the crazy stuff. The Trump's ulterior motive is, if you haven't figured out, that raising more money. He's raised $170 million since the election by denying his loss, and money is going to his political action campaign for perhaps running again, or perhaps funding his gluttonous lifestyle, whatever it is. And yeah, sadly, most Republicans still say they doubt the election. This article from the New York Times of Monday said that 80% of Republicans don't buy the results of the election, saying they don't think Biden won fair and square. The election was rigged, enough fraud occurred to tip the outcome. So healing the great divide when we're dealing with facts versus fancy, it gets challenging. A New York Times opinion writer wrote a couple of weeks ago saying, as we're being told, for those who are not Trump supporters, reach out to Trump supporters. They said, I tried. And then he says, I give up. And in this article, in this op-ed, he wrote that since 2016, he started speaking around the country. He's an American, a Muslim American, Middle Eastern descent, and trying to find that commonality that connects us. And what he said, I did my part. What was my reward? Listening to Trump's base chant, send her back, in reference to Representative Ilhan Omar, who came to America as a refugee, and seeing the McCloskeys, that couple who stood outside their mansion with brandishing firearms in St. Louis when Black Lives Matter protesters marched past their door. And they got a primetime slot at the Republican National Convention, warning about chaos in the suburbs and if the suburbs are invaded by people of color. And so he says, we can't help people who refuse to help themselves. And his conclusion is, don't waste your time reaching out to Trump voters as I did. Instead, invest your time organizing your community. So this is strong statements. On November 8th, the day after Joe Biden was confirmed as the president-elect, Pete Buttigieg tweeted, if someone you love and cared about voted the other way, today might be a good day to reach out. Not to talk politics, but to talk about things that will remind them of yourself, why you love and care about them. Yes, reach out and find your common bond. But a lot of people, understandably so, are having a lot of pain and just anger over this. So there were many replies, and I pulled out two. One person wrote, I just can't. I want a president who takes that mature position for our nation, but I personally don't know if I ever will be able to. They're white supremacists. That hasn't changed. Another person wrote, my parents voted for Trump, not just voted for him, but brazenly defended everything he's done, said for 4 years. I have children that have to grow up in a country he tried to ruin. They voted for more. I haven't spoken to my parents in months and don't know that I'll ever get past it. A lot of us, a lot of people feel this way. And it's, that's where it's like, how do we reach out? What is the best way? This is the question. Then another pundit, Ian Bremmer, who's a brilliant man. I've seen him speak on TV many times. He's a public intellectual. And he wrote, now's the time for every Biden supporter, reach out to one person who voted for Trump, empathize with them, tell them you know how they feel, and you do from 2016, come up with one issue you can agree on. And many replies, and I just pulled out this one. And he said, the only way to heal this country is put every Trump voter in the jail. That's a little extreme, we'd say. And then in reply to Ian Bremmer, one person on Twitter posted a picture, a painting with a quote from James Baldwin that says, "We can disagree and still love each other unless our disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." For many people of color, it's really a sore, a festering wound for the last 4 years. Then on Facebook, on the other side of the coin, a man on Facebook, Paul Ewell, on November 7th, he's the dean of the business school. So an intelligent man from Virginia Wesleyan University wrote, "Please help me with something. If you voted for Joe Biden, please unfriend me or reply that you're a Democrat and I'll unfriend you. If you're ignorant, anti-American, and anti-Christian enough to vote for Biden, I really don't want to be your social friend on social media. I wouldn't hang out with you in real life. I don't want to hang out with you virtually either. You have corrupted the election. You've corrupted our youth, corrupted our country. I have standards. You don't meet them. Please remove yourself." This actually caused a major uproar. He apologized. He said, "Oh, I was just so emotional," but he eventually was forced to resign from the college. Then I tried, just like Anna Day is talking about, reach out on Facebook on November 7th. I wrote, Biden has won. I didn't write anything inflammatory, incendiary. And I had a woman write, and this woman is actually not even a Facebook friend of mine. So I was like, where is she? Who is she? But she wrote, "You libtard's nightmare has just begun." Not exactly a conversation starter. If you're in a bar and you meet someone and you may be thinking, "Oh, I'd like to know this person." Hey, you go, "Hey, your libtard's nightmare has just begun." That's not a good opening line, just to let you know. Anyway, so I asked them, "Are you a real person or a troll?" Because her profile picture was of a happy, loving grandmother. She wrote on her profile, "I'm a grandmother, I'm a widow." And I asked her, "Are you real? Why do you carry so much pain and anger? What's eating you? I just want to know. Maybe I could dialogue with her." And she wrote, she wrote, "She's a real person. I was checking out to determine whether I wanted to send you a friend request. Sorry, I won't be sending you one. Sorry for intrusion." Then I won't read what I wrote to her, but I just wrote, and I did find the commonality. And I'm actually going to talk about the commonality that we do have. But I just said we have more in common than you might believe. We both want a more fair society that allows everyone to thrive. And then this was an earlier, again, a conversation I tried to have in August. I put a Facebook post on my professional page, Dr. Michael Wayne. And on that post, I was talking about the post office and what was going on with the post office. Remember, not too long ago, Trump installed his own postmaster general, and they were slowing things down. I wrote that, and a woman who I don't know who she is wrote, "You don't know what you're talking about. Wow." And so again, I tried to dialogue with her. I asked her, "Please elaborate on why you think I don't know what I'm talking about." And she wrote, "Trump is not suppressing the vote at all. Don't you even listen to him, or just what you hear from others? Do you listen to his press releases? Identity politics is so rampant. You don't even know who Trump is from this post. You will be humbled." And then she wrote, "Unfollowing." And then she sent me a private message asking, "Maybe you're a pedophile, because that is who you are siding with, a whole bunch of criminals that drink the blood of children. Wake up, dude. You're not researching anything. It's all just your opinion. Oh my God, what a liar. I don't even like tomato juice, let alone drink the blood of children." But obviously this is someone who is a QAnon follower. So I had gotten involved with a conspiracy theorist. And this is the big part of the divide is, fact from delusion is a major divide, is when all these people see the world as one big conspiracy, and it's a dark hole and it's scary out there. And I showed the black and white, good and evil. And today it was QAnon. Maybe that's fading, maybe not, but tomorrow, who knows what it is. And so that's another part of this divide. And then they had the famous quote for Abraham Lincoln: "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He actually said this quote in 1858 when he was running for Senate, when the United States was at the precipice of war, a civil war. And because he lost the Senate, then he ran for president. Who would have known 2 years later he'd become president? So now I want to give a brief history lesson, because Abraham Lincoln's quote in 1858 was right at the dawn of the Gilded Age. And there's parallels that I'm going to show to today and why this divide is here. The Gilded Age was from is the late 19th century, from around 1860 to 1900, or just about the beginning of the 20th century, with captains of industry, the so-called robber barons, Vanderbilt with railroads, Carnegie Steel, Rockefeller Oil, Morgan Banking, still JP Morgan Chase, and JP Morgan Chase is the United States, the largest bank in the United States from JP Morgan. And these were the industrialists who were just the Gilded Age, lived so opulently with the government helping them every way, creating policies to support them. They supported the owners of the workers and labor disputes, very few government regulations on big business. And so Rockefeller, Standard Oil, because all these robber barons were basically bribing politicians, they ran the government, the invisible government in the United States. Things were terrible. And what was happening, workers were getting crushed. Workers were basically slaves, low wages, long hours, inhumane working conditions, high rents. And so this is a cartoon from George Pullman, a Pullman sleeping cars, the trains, about trains, what he did to some of the workers. And this was very interesting. What I found was that he knew how loathed he was, and so he arranged to have his coffin sealed with lead and buried at night in a steel and concrete vault 8 feet deep, lest workers desecrate his corpse and revenge for the way he exploited them in life. So I guess he didn't worry about life, what he did to them, but in death he was worried. And so we'll look at a little bit more, some facts about this Gilded Age. Walt Whitman, this is Walt Whitman. I have a quote from him. Walt Whitman lived during this time, and he was the great poet of America, the great bard. He wrote of the optimistic spirit of America and of democracy, the beauty of democracy. But he saw it also what was happening. He said the United States, like the countries of the old world, if they're also able to grow vast crops of poor, desperate, dissatisfied, nomadic, miserably waged populations in our Republican experiment, notwithstanding all its surface successes, is at heart an unhealthy failure. So the Gilded Age was straight out of Dickens, the best of times and the worst of times, an age of great industrial output. For 40 years, US technology was just soaring, and the United States became the most powerful industrial economy in the world. Steel was at the bottom of that. But here was the thing, the level of wealth inequality was obscene. For every one of the wealthy, and there were 63 million people, Americans, that was the US population at that point. For every one of the wealthy, tens of millions of people lived in poverty. The massive wealth inequality threatened the well-being of the nation. In 1890, when US population was 63 million, the 1%, the top 1% owned 51% of the wealth, top 12% owned 86% of the wealth, while the lower 44% owned just 1.2% of wealth. In New York City, where a large number of people lived, 2/3 of the population lived in cramped tenements, in slums, and tens of thousands of New York City residents couldn't even afford to live in cramped tenements. They were homeless. And people were pitted just against each other, just like now, just like we are now. We could be doing this. This could be the year 1895, and Anna Day and I could be doing this webinar. There was a lot of scarcity. People were desperate, and they felt they had to get theirs before the other. And in those days, there were a lot of ethnic, the Chinese, the Italians, the Irish. There was a whole pecking order, took it from them. There just was not enough to go around, but the robber barons living in such an opulent lifestyle, and they were regaled in the press. And this was the traditional, the standard approach of divide and conquer. What the robber barons wanted, the oligarchs wanted, divide and conquer, so they could be assured majority doesn't come into power. Who cares if a populace is tearing each other apart over issues that should bring them together, such as wealth and income inequality and the quest to build a society in which everyone can thrive. To the oligarchs, what matters most is rigging the political system so an emerging majority can't push them aside. It's called tyranny of the minority. Anna Day was bringing this up in the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but the synthesis being for that minority, for that oligarch, for the wealthy elite. And the Gilded Age, there was so much push against what was going on. The Gilded Age ended at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was actually almost a miracle what happened, and it happened rapidly. That the progressive era at the turn of the 20th century began, and it changed everything. Here we have a picture of votes for women, that happened. And then here we have Dorothy and Toto. Now, you may wonder what Dorothy and Toto have to do with this. Well, they actually have to do a lot. Well, maybe not Dorothy and Toto, but Kansas. Kansas, the heart of America, the America's heartland, was where the progressive era started. Topeka, Kansas was the beginning of the People's Party, and the people who were part of the People's Party were called populists. And it was an alliance of progressive-minded people, primarily farmers, working class people, and it spread throughout, like prairie fire, throughout the Midwest and the northern Midwest. States like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Minnesota still has a farmer labor party. And they were up against the East Coast elites. All these wealthy robber barons were stationed in New York, and that just took off. The Progressive Party, the People's Party had a candidate from Nebraska, William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president unsuccessfully a few times. But starting in 1900 with Theodore Roosevelt, he saw what was happening, and he started helping usher in changes. Progressive era lasted 20 years. And again, a lot happened. Antitrust laws that broke up the big trusts, the big monopolies, the anti-corruption laws that stopped bribery of politicians, labor laws that stopped exploitation of workers. It used to be workers were working inhumanely, being poorly paid. They organized, they went on strike, the government sent in troops, shot the workers, worker was killed, but they kept having strikes. They thought, I'd rather be dead than continue to work like this. But the laws finally stopped exploitation, child labor laws, so that children wouldn't have to work, laws that protected unions so unions could come, income tax, progressive income tax, so there could be a wealth distribution, redistribution of wealth, women giving the right to vote, and the beginning of the Federal Reserve and other laws. And then at 1920, something happened that we can relate to right now. In 1918, 1919, there was a pandemic, lasted 2 years, the Spanish flu. And when the United States, when the world came out of it for the next year and a half, there was a depression. But in 1920, 21, the progressive era ended as people just were so elated and just to be alive again and be able to, just like we're feeling now, we can't wait to be able to connect. And it was, you know, the so-called roaring 20s. And then like the progressive laws were intact, but people forgot about it. But what happened was there was, by the end of the decade, the stock market crashed, and it was the Great Depression, and it didn't start changing until Franklin Roosevelt came into power. And the New Deal was about 6 years, and it was basically developing a strong safety net, support for farmers, unemployed, youth, elderly, safeguards in the banking industries, efforts to reinflate the economy, and a whole alphabet soup of different organizations, and basically helping build infrastructure in the United States, and to great success. Then you know, the World War II happened, but then post New Deal for 3 decades, 45 to 79, was the most prosperous period in United States history. It was the approach prioritized the well-being of the middle working classes, brought immense prosperity to an entire nation. And over these decades, all income groups in the US saw their incomes increase at roughly the same rate. Every income group saw their share of the national income remain roughly the same. The poorest Americans saw their incomes double, and the richest Americans saw their incomes double as well. So needless to say, there was no wealth inequality, was not happening. Everybody was doing well. I mean, for the most part, there was great opportunity for social mobility. But now, since 1979, 1980, things have changed. We're in a new Gilded Age where wealth and income inequality is at levels not seen since the original Gilded Age. And it's gotten way worse over the last 20 years. now the 50 richest Americans with a worth of $2 trillion hold almost as much wealth as half the country. So this is now not in the Gilded Age in the late 19th century. In addition, the top 1% of Americans have a combined net worth of 34 trillion, while the poorest 50% hold just 2 trillion, or 1.9% of all household wealth. Again, not much different than the Gilded Age. And again, lo and behold, we're tearing each other apart. So this is the lesson of history. When there's so much inequality, divide and conquer, we start tearing each other apart instead of coming to commonality and looking what's happening. It started changing with the progressive era. And so now, again, it's time for a new progressive era. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who would be one of these progressive leaders, she said last year, she was talking about Trump, but just to show you, it's not just Trump. She said he can stay, he can go, and he can be impeached, which he was, or voted out in 2020, which he was, thankfully. But removing Trump won't remove the infrastructure of an entire party, the Republican Party, that embrace him, the dark money that funded him, the online radicalization that drummed his army, nor the racism he amplified and reanimated. So again, this is divide that's roots are very deep, go way before Trump. He just animated it, amplified it. And so here's the truth. And this is, I firmly believe, but I'm going to explain why. We're not going to change Trump supporters by trying to reason with them. You try and reason with someone like I did, who accuses me of drinking the blood of children, where as I said, I don't even drink tomato juice. But there are a lot of good groups that are trying. Anna mentioned the living room conversations. There's out of Stanford University, there's the Center for Deliberative Democracy. And last year they did this program, American One Room, where they brought together 500 American voters of all shades to spend a few days talking about the major issues and get to know each other and understand each other and hear each other. The New York Times wrote an article about it in October, how it went, that the American One Room a year later, here how they're voting. This is just a sample selection of pictures of the people. And the article is really good. It was very fascinating, and they really got to hear each other, and they were softened to each other. And then there's another organization, Braver Angels, and they also work at trying to end the growing animosity towards the other political party. And they show that 91% of Republicans agree that Democrats are very unfavorable, and 86 Democrats say the same thing. Republicans are very unfavorable. And there's other organizations too. Someone told me today about an organization called compassionatelistening.org. So that's not to say we shouldn't listen. We shouldn't try and hear what this pain is, the wounds. That's important. But there's something even bigger. We will change them, people who don't understand this, by creating a society that works for all. And then they can reap the rewards and realize that they, and myself and I and all of us, want the same thing, a society that works for all. We need to stop tearing each other apart and not give in to divide and conquer. And the true value of a nation is its people. If we give everyone the chance to improve their lives, everyone prospers. And this is true. The famous saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. And what this will do, if we really abide by this philosophy, it's going to open up a new renaissance. I truly believe it, a new renaissance and a new age of enlightenment, where if we really, and I'll explain what this philosophy, how it looks in just a moment. And we could say the famous saying, the personal is the political. That's really the motto we have to live by. This new age enlightenment is not about our personal well-being, just about me and my self-actualization. It's about the well-being of all. It's about we. It's all about we awaken together as a people. And so we need to imagine and envision what this new society looks like and then put into action. And you could call it post-capitalism, collaborative commons, social democracy, a Star Trek society, that's the society they created in Star Trek, utopia, and economics for lovers. That's a plug for, I'm writing a book called Economics for Lovers, so a little plug. A Thrive society, enlightened society, or, fill in the blank. You can call it what you want, but this is how we get there. Okay, so buckle your seatbelt. I'll tell you, this is it. The US GDP is currently $20 trillion a year, and the US invests 25% of that per year in its people. It is not enough. That amount needs to be double. We need to invest 50% of GDP, 12 trillion, 10 trillion a year into society. We need to flood society with cash that goes to everyone, not just like helicopter money where we just let it out, but just like in the pandemic where people were receiving stimulus checks and unemployment, pandemic employment. We've talked about an earlier Visionary in the Future webinars about like universal basic income. And all we have to do is open our minds to an abundance, to a reality. We have to get away from closed mind, like, oh, we can't do that. We can't afford that. People need to work. It's just all there. We need to create a new global Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is what happened after World War II, when the United States took the lead in rebuilding Europe, which was devastated. We, the United States and other countries also, collaborated together, put a lot of money, probably put 50% of their GDP into rebuilding Europe. And Europe now is thriving. I mean, they have their problems. It took a few decades, 3 or 4 decades, but Europe, because of things like universal basic health care, free education, and many other things, they're a much more humane place. So we need to create a new global Marshall Plan that will include a global healthcare agency, so there's never a pandemic, ever, a global court for ecological justice, so we deal with climate change correctly, a world retirement fund, so people can, when they're ready to not work with dignity, a world education bank, so people can be educated for free, a human well-being fund, so everybody's taken care of, universal basic income or just living a debt-free life, and a natural well-being protection agency. These are just different things I thought of, so people can live healthy lives. And we can hire millions from all those who have no jobs or underemployed or don't like their job to staff and run all these agencies and more, and give people the freedom and room to spend vast amounts of money within them. From 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt started his rule when he became president, was inaugurated, till 1968, the Democrats, who were much more interested in bolstering up the social safety net, were in office and the president for 28 of those 36 years. They were very popular because people really saw what they were, and they weren't running the White House for all 36 of those years, was because from 1952 to 1960, Dwight Eisenhower was president, and he was recruited by both parties. He hadn't decided which party he would run for, but Dwight Eisenhower was the hero from World War II. He was like universally loved. So he chose to go to the Republicans, and he ran it as a moderate Republican. So, but the safety net was strengthened. There was this was all the prosperous years I talked about. And there was no tearing at each other's throat. So doing something like this, spending 50% of GDP, creating all these global Marshall Plan really can take us to a new global age. What Barbara Marx Hubbard called Homo universalis, really. And that, as I sum up, is how we heal the Great Divide. So that is my show. So I'm going to stop my slideshow, I think. Let's see. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, let me get back here. There we go. All right. So that
Let's take some questions and comments here and see where that will take us.
Yeah. I'm sure all of you perhaps need to kind of take this in. That was a lot we gave. So hopefully And we'll be back next Thursday night to do a discussion. So Anna Day and I won't take up all the time with presentations, but we gave you a lot there. We need to kind of have heart-to-heart talks, get to really peel the wall down, the Berlin Wall of our soul, and also change the priorities of society. So someone
I think
wrote,
what you're talking about is how economics is really at the root of a lot of it in creating that divide. And of course, those who have don't want to give it away.
yeah, that's why I said that picture, that image you had on a day of the two people fishing was really appropriate. Yeah, it's really going to take an evolution of consciousness, and that's why I said, it's really opening up a new renaissance and a new age of enlightenment.
Well, let's take some of these questions while we have time. Powerhouse, I don't know what your name is, but says QAnon has conspiracy theorists, but it is not the heart of the matter for the movement to have taken place. We recognize a number of trolls in every movement. How many, of course, now the internet makes that, more ubiquitous. How many receipts or proofs are needed to be recognized for the word theory to not always be attached to an attacker's narrative? Often the attacker of any movement are those who've blinded themselves to recognize who or what they are pitted against, be it an idea, person, an institution, a government at all. Well, I think the attacker's narrative is a very good point. That it is so much easier to believe that you are the victim, the helpless victim of some nefarious cabal that has gathered up to, for your demise, than to admit that, life is full of conflict and life is full of difficulty, and we don't get to things easily or in a straight line. And we need a better narrative. If people are going to believe these conspiracy theories, it's because they're not getting a better story. And this old story of us against them, me against you, a secret plot that every TV show has it, we just keep applying it. And it's so familiar that people buy it. So I think to combat that, we just need to create a better story, and one that does embrace everyone. Lynn says, hi guys, very interesting and hopeful. Do you think things will be better under Biden, or will his hand be tied? Personally, I think both. What would you say, Michael? I think it will be better. I think his hands will be tied. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things on that. I think things approach of the social safety net, talking about an executive order for doing something about student debt, for, let's say, and many other things. But I was talking to someone and they said, oh, Mitch McConnell, he's going to block everything. And I said, he's an immovable force, but when an immovable force is up against an he's an immovable object, McConnell is, but an immovable object is up against an unstoppable force. The immovable object will have to step out of the way. And I said, the American people are the immovable force, unstoppable force.
Yeah, unstoppable force.
So, unstoppable force, the American public.
Yeah. Michael, you have a question here about climate change. So fantastic. Thank you very much. We do wonder why, especially in Michael's presentation, there isn't more attention to climate change. The Global Marshall Plan doesn't seem to include anything about pivoting toward a green economy.
Oh, thank you for Michael. Thank you. That, of course, as I said, it was off the top of my head. But when I was talking about the GDP, 50% of GDP going into society, we could say things like Green New Deal, universal basic income, free college, single payer healthcare, free health, whatever, just a reformed healthcare system. All these things, I could have gone into specifics. Thank you, Michael, for asking about that. But yeah, Green New Deal is essential. Way back when Anna Day and I did the webinar, Visioneering the Future webinar on economy, we talked about all these things, how it gets paid for, and laid out the case for why this is all doable. So Yeah, we moved towards a green economy, and things like college are addressed, and housing and basic income and daycare and food, quality of food. That's why I said it'd be like a golden age. I mean, it's really like it would be a dream come true to have a green economy, and it's doable. And I saw Marie was asking about uh, chakras on today, so I'll let you
Oh,
answer that.
yeah, great presentation. Thanks. Isn't it interesting that we have a global pandemic affecting our lungs and fourth chakra at the time we are being asked to be more loving toward each other and to the planet to close these huge divisions we're experiencing? Well, love, there was the infamous Aleister Crowley said, thus for love's sake are we divided. And so love is that which bridges the divide and brings us back to unity again. And I think that as we are, people who know my work know that I talk about, we're coming into an age of the heart. And an age of the heart is the balance in the chakra system. The heart is the balance between heaven and earth, mind and body, in and out, masculine, feminine, light and dark. It's the balance and the integration of polarities coming back into a unity. So I think it's no surprise that all these polarities are coming to their greatest division so that we can go to a higher level and bring them back together. And that is part of the maturing into the heart. So thank you. Yes, Marie. Okay, you want to take the next questions, Michael?
Let's see. Lisa says, right? Lisa's next. Doubtful that any of us are in the top 1%, and even if we were, surely there's enough wealth to spread around and raise everyone up. What can be done to help the very rich share the wealth? Is that right? To help the very rich share the wealth? Oh, to help the rich share the wealth. Well, yeah, this is you have some rich people, especially those in the financial industry, who are basically psychopaths. They're just, that's why I said the photo of the image Anna had with the fisherman, the rich fisherman stealing the fish from the poor fisherman, is just basically what they're doing. They're just extracting as much wealth as they can. And that is sadly has been the story of humanity for a long time. But I think if we change our philosophical orientation to helping everyone with this type of Green New Deal, to this green economy, to spreading the wealth, the rich will just, there'll be less to extract it. And again, with the progressive era, there were really strict laws about the financialization of the economy. Antitrust laws and monopolies were broken up. So laws are on the books to stop this. The bank, and then in the Great Depression, there was the Glass-Steagall Law Act that got put in to regulate banks. So all laws have to be enforced, reinstated. And it's not like realistically tomorrow, this what I talked about, global Marshall Plan is going to go into effect and happen. But as in Europe, it took about 30 years to build up a very sustainable continent and countries and a social and very healthy social democracies as they got rebuilt, and they learned how to live together through the horrors of war, being torn apart, and they saw what they didn't want. So
I might speak one little thing to that. I agree that probably most of us in this call are not in the 1% or the 1/10% or 0.01% that they say is the, owning most of the wealth. But even though I'm, the difference between the 1% and me is this huge gap. The difference between me and the panhandler on the corner of the street is probably the same percentage, and if I'm not willing to give that panhandler some money when I go by, then I'm no better than the guy with millions that is not willing to make a donation to some cause. It's just a matter of scale. I don't have millions to give away. But if I can't give that panhandler $10, then I'm the same thing that can't part with my money to help someone less fortunate. Now that's a tricky thing because, you don't know whether that person's on drugs or whether they're just struggling. But I assume that anybody in the winter that's out there on the corner holding up a sign is not doing well for whatever reason. And who am I to judge? So I think that it's all relative. And not that, we can help every homeless person. We don't have the money for that. But, when you see it, can you help? And I don't know whether that'll have any effect on the super rich, but I think it is incumbent upon all of us. So I just want, it's a little pet peeve I have.
Yeah, well, universal basic income experiments that have been done and impoverished people who've received it, it's changed their life a lot. The studies have shown. So that's one way to help the most impoverished. And one other thing also about what Lisa was saying, help the rich. A lot of these very wealthy people are really miserable people, really unhappy. I mentioned this book I'm writing, Economics for Lovers, and I've been deep in the weeds and research, and I've been reading about the lifestyles, the personal lives, researching of some of these very wealthy billionaire people, and they're just miserable people. So
on the other hand, I was reading an article about some of the younger people that have come into a lot of money. Either they've inherited it or they've made money in the tech industry. And they go, why should I have money when other people don't? And they're giving it all away. So it is happening. And I think, how it happens is that some people start that movement. And it needs to become kind of a value that we hold of, generosity is held in high esteem and holding back is not respected. We have a culture that values the rich. Lifestyles of the rich and famous is a popular show on TV, or it was, so people think that's great, but really we need to hold a value where, hey, that's not such a good way to behave, but we reward and uphold the people who are being generous and doing philanthropy and helping others.
Yeah. No, yeah. And then from SUNY Adirondack Continuing Education. That was a lot to ingest. Yeah, we definitely threw out a lot. I'd like to hear it again to set my questions correctly. If you're on my email list, you'll get the recording. Otherwise, you can go on my Facebook page, Dr. Michael Wayne, and see the Facebook Live, which will be up there. Seems the new Enlightenment movement is in full sway. I'm not sure what your point is. How do we make the changes that need to be made? I like the idea of living room conversations. Yeah, any way people get together and talk their differences out is wonderful. How do we make the changes that need to be made? That's a really good question. And I think we all need to hold put and understand, have living room conversations, and know also we need to change the structure of society. And that's why I made the point that Democrats were in office and president for 28 out of 36 years, and they could have been 36 years because the majority of the country loved what they were doing to help society. So we need to be on par with the social democracies of Europe. We need to agitate for that. And Dale, you want to read?
Yeah, sure. How are we going to merge with other organizations who have the same vision of creating the new global supportive world? I've puzzled over that one a lot because I get every single flyer from every environmental organization that I've ever donated to, and now they've pegged me on my email, and I go, why? I just would much rather give a big check to one organization that umbrellaed all of those. So it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. How do we not have all these organizations competing with each other or recreating the wheel, and actually have them come together? I think as the organizations continue to grow, there will be a natural coming together. It's kind of how the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. The imaginal cells clump together, and then the clumps join the other clumps, and then pretty soon it becomes a butterfly. So I think that it's all the process. These imaginal cells are making their organizations, and as we grow, we realize we need each other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And let me add, just from what I talked about in my slideshow, things change dramatically. I mean, this is also with the imaginal cells, what Anna Day was saying. Things change dramatically, like at the turn of the century, from the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era. Radically quickly, the pendulum swung from this horrible society that had been created to this more equitable from 1900 to 1920, and then again from 1932 on. So things can change quickly. The story of society can change rapidly, and believe that. Lisa asked, don't they need enlightenment? Not sure who they is. So maybe Lisa, you'll
we all need enlightenment.
Yeah.
We all need it. Yeah. Yeah, I think we have to get out of the us and them
Yeah.
mentality. It's such a hard thing to do. We all are guilty
Yeah.
of it. I'm guilty of it. And to try and get out
Mhm.
of that labeling, and because us and them makes them into an it. And then it's not a dialogue anymore. It's not the I thou. Powerhouse says we need to get away from using the word new to drive an ideal, to be a seed planted to grow a garden or rebuild from community level to, as Michael referenced, a trickle up effect and make larger change along the way. Everything needn't be new. It merely needs utilization and implementation. We needn't awaken or change the sheep. We need to rouse the sleeping lions. We are all lions. We've been told for too long that we are not. God wins. We need to harness the power God gives us for us to win also. I like to see, I like that we raise the roaring lions. Let's raise up to wake everybody up. And, this winning, I like to think of us all winning. What is a win-win solution? What is a way we can all win? Not as what is a way I can win finally from being the victim or the underdog or, the one on the outs and finally get mine. It's more, how can we all win?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's like abundance mindset versus scarcity, where we all realize we all win.
Here's a good one from Marie. One of the US problems is the Protestant work ethic mentality that she hears from Trump people, the fear of undeserving people getting welfare when they had to work hard for what they got. And I think that that's underlying a lot of it. And of course, the Republicans or conservatives that don't want a stimulus package right now when 30 million people could become evicted from their homes. There is this thing of I had to work hard for my money and I go to work every day and do this job and these people are just freewheeling. It was the old welfare Cadillac, welfare queens or whatever that Reagan put out back then. You might talk about that more, Michael. This work ethic underneath it. And this is something that universal basic income comes up against, right?
Hmm. Yeah, the myth of they'll never work, or maybe they'll work at the job they want or what they want to do. And I just want to the question before from Powerhouse saying there's an equal number of studies to show universal income haven't and can't work. There's actually a lot of studies that show universal basic income works, and the pandemic insurance, unemployment insurance that people received, the great majority of economists are all in agreement that's what propped up the economy for all those months that the economy sink as it could have from March till September. And even now it hasn't sunk as bad because all the people, and it was basically a universal basic income in a way. So I think many economists are agreeing. And actually, as we talked about in our webinar on universal basic income almost became a reality in the United States. And it was Richard Nixon, who was president, who was the one who almost instituted it. A
Yeah.
very, conservative president.
And they were afraid that we give women enough money to leave their abusive husbands.
Right. Yeah, that was one of Republicans got nervous because there were studies saying, oh, more divorces will happen. But yeah, maybe
You're probably right. More divorces probably would have happened because many women stayed with bad marriages because they didn't have the economic wherewithal to leave. Oversight organization for more accountability. Lisa says, I was talking about the very rich who may very well be unhappy and need healing. The reason I was talking about getting them to share more is because it's going to take mucho dinero to accomplish many of these big positive things, and the 1% have most of it. Yeah, the 1%, if you put a price tag on all the things that could fix the world, many years ago, Lester Brown wrote his Plan B, there was a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then he stopped writing the books. But in each one, he totaled up what it would cost to fix climate change, what it would cost to fix soil depletion, overpopulation, hunger. And he put at the end of the book a price tag on it. And I think the one several years ago was something like $200 billion, which, that was some years ago. But if you took the world's richest 8 people and you took a small fraction of their income that they each donated, 10 to 20% of their income, it would be enough to solve all these problems of the world. Quite simply. And I think that if we get to a point where it's bad enough, we realize that, climate change and air pollution and many things, and the virus, it hits across rich and poor party lines. Of course, we know it hits the poor harder. But, you look at all the statesmen that are getting coronavirus. It hasn't, so these things can be the great leveling of the playing field.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. It was something I talked about in the webinar months ago on economics, talking about the deficit myth. The money is there, even if we don't tax the rich. The money is there. I mean, I've talked about this. The hundreds of trillions of dollars, or tens of trillions of dollars that the Federal Reserve has given to Wall Street banks. That's not money from the U.S. Treasury. That's money they've just conjured out of thin air. But taxation, and I agree, there should be more redistribution of wealth, more taxation. But taxation should be done to extract money. This is economic talk, to extract money out of the economy so that all the money going into the economy from, let's say, instead of Federal Reserve going to Wall Street, doesn't create that inflation. That's always a fear of too much money flooding an economy. So we tax to extract, and the tax should be fair, and wealthy paying their more than fair share. Corporate tax being fair, stopping this money laundering where people hide their money so they evade taxes and so on. So it's there, and that's what I was talking about, the GDP up 50% and what it could do. And Lisa points out the Pope. Yeah, the Pope's been a beautiful voice for the common good. He even came out, no, that was a couple of months ago. He spoke about the need for a universal basic income. And Paris wrote,
necessity is different due that it was government that shut us down. It's different to use a Band-Aid approach as opposed to calling that the way it should be going forward. Universal income is far different than what I refer to as an extra IRS income tax check back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well.
Yeah. Oh, this is
great.
Like
there's lots of interest perhaps in discussion, which we'll do next week.
Yeah.
Next Thursday, same time, right?
Yeah. So hopefully you're on my email list and you have the link. I sent out the link. If you're not on my email list and you want to get the recording, that's my email. Just email me your email address. It'll go on. So you'll get the recording. We'll send out the recording within a couple of days so that you can have that if you want to join the discussion. I'll be sending out the link again for the discussion. I sent it out in the emails. I'll be putting it up on Facebook also. The recordings, this also is on my Dr. Michael Wayne Facebook page. So one way or another, you could see it. I'll also on social media put the link to the discussion group. But yeah, this was great. I'm glad we stimulated a lot of conversation. It can be done, and thank you everyone. So we could have a really lively discussion for sure.
We're all figuring this out together, And I think that more discussion is how we generate new ideas, and new ideas give us something to pull towards, and then we don't fall into the abyss of the divide. Yeah,
and Barbara Marx Hubbard, such a beautiful old soul, left this earth a couple of years ago at a ripe young age of 88. But she talked about, and what I brought up, Homo Universalis, and this is she had that vision, and she saw it clearly, and that's what we want to go towards.
Waking the global heart.
Yeah, right. What Anadea wrote. Yeah, also very clear vision. So great. Well, thank you, everyone. And so if you didn't get to your question, or got more questions, come on next week, next Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you again soon. So thanks, everyone. And yeah, bye.
Bye.
Peace out. Bye-bye.